Week 7 block party DFS show with Jmtowin from 1 week season. We are going to do a high level overview of this week 7 DFS slate from a GPP perspective. We'll then go position by position and get JM's favorite plays on the slate. And then we'll wrap up, as always, with a lineup build on DraftKings with some of JM's favorite building blocks. I'm Pete. This is the block party. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 66, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, coach spot bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right, we got Jmtowin, and you look bigger today. I think just the juxtaposition of your location, you look like a giant, like in a tiny little house.
Isn't it funny when you meet somebody that you've only talked to online and you don't have any concept of how tall or short they are, and they're either much taller or much shorter than you expected them to be? You'll find out if we get a chance to get together this next week that I am actually 5'4". And no, I'm like 6'2", but no, there have been several people I've met, and I've been very surprised at their height based on just what they look like on camera.
It normally people find you or think you're going to be smaller or shorter than you are. I think because most people's cameras are from up above, and that kind of perspective makes people feel shorter. So, but that's the trick. I think if you want, here you go, all you future DFS streamers out there, if you want to look tall to your audience, have your camera coming up from an angle up top. You just got to avoid like the bad chin shots, but then you'll look really big like Jam right now.
You have the nose shots. Yeah, I mean, I worked with Hefe and Levitan for years, and then finally got together with them in person, and they're both short dudes. I just assumed we were all the same height. And then Silva's like a giant. So you just never know. You never know until you see somebody in person.
All right, let's get to it here. Quick little week 6 recap. I'm always trying to jog my memory. We obviously had the Chris Godwin nuclear game. You know, Baker Mayfield played well. We had Jordan Love spreading the ball around. How did your week 6 go?
It was good. I had I had my first legit sweat of the season for the flea flicker and the slant. Finished like top 0.15% in both of those, and just had I had Dalton, Chuba, Deontay, and Bijan Robinson going on those rosters, and had hit like everything early on those ones, and then just things didn't run out for me that last quarter and a half, interceptions, punts, and whatnot. But yeah, it was a good week, and keep knocking on the door. Things happen. Big week for OWS. So we like that. And yeah, I'm excited about this week as well. It's a unique week with unique salary stuff. A lot of information we're still waiting. I mean, a lot of information we're still waiting on. It kind of shakes out pretty importantly, but we'll do what we can on this show. And I think from a macro perspective and a perspective of some of the core components of this slate, we'll be able to provide a lot of value today.
Yeah, we kind of always have that dynamic here. If you guys are new to the show, we record these live Fridays at 1 p.m. Eastern, which generally coincides with a lot of kind of late week news coming out. Like, for instance, we just got word Jonathan Taylor is officially out. We'll get kind of so-so news of Deontay Johnson's dealing with this rib injury, and they're not sure until he talks to trainers. So we work with the information we have here. The goal of this show is to give you guys ideas, get the juices flowing, ways these pieces could fit together, and the game environments that we think could, propel you to the top of the leaderboard. So that's how you should be thinking about this. Let's start right at the top. Like you said, pretty fun slate. We have some games with big totals here. Lots of, I think, angles and directions you could go. So what was kind of your high level overview of this week 7 slate?
Yeah. Another thing I want to add just on what you were saying there was that, we're going to talk about players and games and situations, but also just a reminder that DFS is a strategy game. It's not a game of picking players, the people who win tournaments. And that's the people who you're competing against, the people who win tournaments. You're not competing against the field. The field generally makes a lot of mistakes. It's great to beat them and finish in the money, but you want to get those top 0.1% finishes. That's where the money is. And from that perspective, you have to think about the strategy. So ideally, even on sites where we're waiting on news, we're able to help you with a lot of the sort of strategy information. So from my end, I see a decent amount of chalk this week that I'm not particularly interested in myself, which I always like weeks like that. And not that there's not a decent number of weeks like that, but I like weeks where players I'm just not really on are going to be relatively popular. And usually that's because of projections, median projections. And I'm always thinking about what can win me a tournament. So players who will probably have a solid game, but as we often talk about, if you open the DraftKings app on Sunday evening, ideally your bubbles for your rosters are all the way to the right or all the way to the left. And that's because there's kind of the clumped up plays in the middle that don't have as much ceiling, but people gravitate toward them because they're more comfortable plays. They project well, they're strong for cash games, so they get talked about a lot. And so some weeks you're going to go for the more high risk, high reward plays, and they don't climb over that clumped up bunch of rosters in the middle. You get bounced all the way to the left. But then when those things hit, you jump over that clumped up bunch of rosters. So I see that this week. This is an interesting week at quarterback. I think for me, it's going to be a pay down week, but I think it's also going to be a pay down week at running back. And then there's some wide receivers, some expensive wide receivers I really like. There are some cheap wide receivers I'm drawn toward pending injury news. And then there are some expensive tight ends that I like, and I think that's a sharp way to go this week. I also think it's interesting, we don't spend a lot of time on tight end on this show, but if you're looking for value, right, like a lot of the sub 4K tight ends have better floors and ceilings than most of the sub 4K wide receivers. So I think this is where whether you're going 2 tight ends to go Kelsey Bowers, which is a really unique strategy angle because the Kelsey rosters won't have Bowers and vice versa. So like if both guys hit, which could happen, they're playing independent of each other, right? They can hit without any correlation between the two, but most of the people who have the Bowers score won't get the Kelsey score and vice versa. So trying to get both of those or throwing a cheaper tight end into the flex for salary saver purposes, I think those are some viable options this week as well. So yeah, just as always, a unique slate, but some fun stuff to play around with today.
Yeah, looking at the games here, I have pulled up via the 1 week season matchup screener here. A lot of nice totals. Hawks Falcons 24 and 27 game totals. Obviously, people are into this Washington spot versus the Panthers. They have nearly a 30-point team total. Texans Packers is pretty healthy there. Lions Vikings, of course, we got the Justin Jefferson cover boy. That one is over 50. So are there a lot of game environments you're interested in this week?
Yeah, but game environments can fool us too. I mean, take the Commanders, for example. Well, first off, how many tournament winning scores have they produced? You could kind of push the envelope and say 1, but really none outside of Jaden Daniels' scores. And then what have teams done against the Panthers? This is unique, right? Because the Panthers are such a bad defense, and yet only one team could you have combined quarterback, running back 1, and wide receiver 1 and topped 60 points. 5 out of 6 teams against the Panthers, their quarterback, running back, wide receiver 1 has gone below 60 DraftKings points. And then the other one, it was like 77 DraftKings points, which, Jaden Daniels plus if Brian Robinson plays, Brian Robinson, Terry McLaurin, they cost, I think it's 20.8K in salary. So you need at least 80 points to keep you on a 200-point pace. 5 of these 6 games, it's been below 60 points. It was a sub 150-point pace. And it's not because the Panthers are a good defense. They're a bad defense, but they're so bad that teams are running the ball a bunch against them. And number 2 running backs against them, there have been 3 games where the number 2 running back has seen the same number of carries or more carries than the number 1 running back. And so we're just not having an opportunity for a lot of points to pile up on alpha players against the Panthers. And so I think there are traps like that, when you kind of dig into the numbers, you kind of start seeing these things and find some little edges that you can exploit. So obviously waiting for injury news there with Brian Robinson. I think if Brian Robinson's out, we have some really interesting angles there. But if Brian Robinson plays, you have kind of a 3-headed backfield because you have to assume they're going to rest Brian Robinson's knee if they're in control. Then they're probably going to rest Austin Eckler. Like Eckler's not going to get the 15, 18 touches that we've seen other number 2 running backs get because, he's kind of their explosive piece. They want to keep him healthy. He's an older guy in NFL terms, running back terms. And so, it could be 3 guys going out there this week and getting touches if Robinson plays. So, just lots of little things like that to pay attention to that makes this a really unique week.
Yeah, that's a good note about how to attack the Commanders there. What about, that Hawks-Falcons game? That one's kind of interesting to me in that it's 2 teams that clearly want to run the ball, but we've seen them have success passing in certain game scripts. How are you feeling about that environment?
Yeah, and I'll push back on the Seahawks and say, to me, I think they really want to pass the ball. They're number 1 in pass rate over expectation. They've had pass attempt totals this year of 40, 44, 52, and 56, I think is what it is, right? Like just ridiculous pass attempt totals. The big issue there, Atlanta allows the shallowest average depth of target in the NFL and the fewest 20-plus yard pass plays in the NFL. So it's a question of the volume's going to be there. It's a question of can they drive the field. This is a really interesting stat. Atlanta 7th worst in the NFL in drive success rate on defense. So
Wow.
for any of you who aren't familiar with drive success rate, it's basically a measure of how many fresh sets of downs turn into a first down or touchdown. So bad drive success rate on defense means you let teams drive the field against you. The teams behind them are like Carolina, Arizona, Washington, Cincinnati, like these teams we've been picking on all year. And so you can drive the field against Arizona. That matters in PPR scoring, right? Because if the Seahawks are able to drive the field, if they're throwing the ball a bunch, there's a chance for lots of volume to pile up. But there really hasn't been like big statistical production against them in terms of yards. One wide receiver has topped 100 yards. It was Rashee Rice on 14 targets. So yeah, it's an interesting spot. It's one of these spots where do both teams score in the 20s? Almost certainly. Do both teams score in the 30s? Almost certainly not. Like it has a difficult path to developing into a shootout. My interest is definitely way more on the Seattle side because of the way that they're playing offense and just the fact that, yes, Atlanta's not going to give up explosives, but there is a pathway to Seattle driving the field, having tons of passing volume. DK Metcalf and JSN both seeing a lot of targets. They've had games where they combined for 20, 24, and 30 targets between the two of them. And really interesting there too is most people would play one or the other. Geno singles is probably what most people will do, but all of DK Metcalf's high target games have coincided with high target games for JSN, right? Because it just means Geno's passing a lot. So if they're able to put together drives in this one, this could be a really interesting spot for that Seattle offense.
Any other games that kind of stand out to you as unique or worth discussing on their own before we hop into quarterbacks?
Yeah, I always like good offenses against good defenses. I lean toward the good offense because a lot of times good defense is just a function of this team doesn't make a lot of mistakes, and most NFL teams are not well coached. They're not disciplined. They make mistakes throughout the game. But when you have a good offense against a good defense, the edge usually goes toward the offense, and you see those offenses racking up yards and points. So a game like Detroit and Minnesota, incredibly important game in that tight division, and that's a game where I could see lots of points being scored, things kind of skewing to the upside there.
Yeah, that game definitely stands out. I'm sure we'll dig into it more specifically with the plays. And let's go ahead and do that right now. We'll head over to quarterback. I think the conversation for most people this week is going to start right at the top with Jayden Daniels. He's the most expensive quarterback, 7,600. Obviously has a nice matchup here against the Panthers, although you kind of already mentioned that maybe there isn't enough to fully go around here. How are you thinking about Jayden Daniels in this spot?
Yeah, I mean, tournament winning scores from quarterbacks usually come from one team jumping out to a big lead and that quarterback trailing, having to pass the ball a bunch, or come from just one team, passing the ball a bunch by nature of the way that they play and the matchup and being a competitive game. Yeah, I mean, Jayden Daniels is going to need a lot to break his way to put up 30 points, which if you're paying for him at this price tag, that's taking away the ability to pay for Justin Jefferson or for AJ Brown or for Amon-Ra St. Brown or for Malik Nabers, right? And so he has to produce at a level that matches those guys, which means one or two of those guys is going to score 30 points, right? Can you guess which guy? Who knows, right? But as we always say, somebody in tournaments is going to guess correctly and you're chasing those rosters. So he has to match what those top wide receivers produce, or at least the second best wide receiver produces, because you can't play three of those guys. You can't play Jayden and two of those wide receivers, or Jayden or whatever high price running backs you like as well. And so to me, Jayden Daniels is not top of mind. And he's one of those plays like, am I going to go out of my way to argue against him? No, he's been awesome. He runs the ball, but like the Panthers are dead last in pressure rate. So how many scrambles are we going to see from him? He has one game of over 30 pass attempts. And that was, in this shootout against the Ravens where he's chasing points the whole time. I just have a hard time seeing him throwing the ball more than 30 times. I have a hard time seeing him flush out of the pocket and having to scramble a bunch. So will he be efficient? Will he have a solid game? Yes. I just don't know that the Panthers can drive him into like the type of score that we really need from him.
So elsewhere here at the top, we got Josh Allen. I don't get the sense that people are excited to play him this week at this price tag. He's just been a little bit of a disappointment on the year. Jalen Hurts as well. Things finally kind of got going in the passing game last week, and he still only hits, just shy of 22 fantasy points. Any thoughts on these other expensive guys at the top?
Yeah, I'm sure I'll have like 2% Josh Allen in large field play just because you never know. Tennessee's a really good defense. Jalen Hurts has just been a bad fit in this Kellen Moore offense, which doesn't mean that can't change. But Kellen Moore, kind of the anti-Shane Steichen, right? Like Kellen Moore has come in and been like, okay, here's what I've been successful with in the past, and we're going to have you adapt to this. But where Dak Prescott and Justin Herbert have strengths is places where Jalen Hurts has weaknesses, and vice versa. But instead of adapting his offense to Jalen Hurts, so actually this year, Jalen Hurts ranks 44th in PFF passing grade, which is just insane. He has is by far his second worst PFF grade of his career, just barely ahead of his rookie year and well behind the last 3 seasons. So not to say that he can't turn it around or can't have a good game, but this is a good Giants defense, one of the top red zone defenses in football, top adjusted sack rate in football. And, it's just not a spot where I'm super excited about him. Another guy who it wouldn't surprise me if he found a way to 30 DraftKings points, but I probably won't be going out of my way to play him just because of the way that I want to spend salary this week.
So if we're not in love with some of these kind of rushing guys, more expensive guys at the top, I assume that's going to put us more in the kind of pocket passer territory here. Who kind of stands out to you at quarterback this week?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the games that stand out are, this Detroit-Minnesota game. Geno Smith, as I said, a spot where we could see a lot of passing volume from him. And again, can he top 300 yards? It's going to be tough against Atlanta. That's not what teams have done against Atlanta. I think they've given up 193 passing yards a game, but Geno's got 5 games of 284 plus because he's throwing the ball so much. So I could see Geno having a good game here. He's not one of my primary guys. Darnold's probably going to be my primary guy, but I like Geno. I like Daniel Jones. I like Andy Dalton, and these are kind of ugly names, but I think that these are the types of guys who this week, a lot of the more expensive guys might only put up 24, 25 points. And some of these guys, at least 1 or 2 of these guys can put up 20. Actually kind of crazy looking back to, we know Daniel Jones can put up 30 plus, right? He's actually put up 29.5 or more DraftKings points in 16% of his career games, which is like 1 out of every 6. So Daniel Jones is a guy who can actually put up 30 plus and win your tournament. You can pair him with Malik Nabers. It's just an easy way to go. And then Andy Dalton, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold, and tie in some Jared Goff with that. And then I also think, we said pocket passers, right? But Anthony Richardson's kind of hiding down here. He's still only completed 5 games in his career. And one of them was 27 points. One of them was 30 points. And so, I think he's interesting here as well. Miami, not allowing a lot of points to quarterbacks, but they're one of the worst run defenses in football. And that's where, Anthony Richardson's going to help you the most.
Yeah, so it does seem like, mentioning the rushing stuff of like kind of the arbitrage versions of Anthony Richardson and Daniel Jones, and saving that, 1,600, almost 2,000 in the case of Daniel Jones off of guys like Jaden Daniels could be a good route to go. And then I assume when we're talking about Darnold, when we're talking about Dalton, we're talking about Geno, are those probably going to be double stack plays for you? Like you're really, playing those guys to throw for 300 plus yards in those scenarios?
Yeah, and again, what we love is volume, especially with PPR scoring. That's why Jordan Love, he throws so many touchdown passes and throws for so many yards, and you don't really get Jordan Love double stacks being in place to win a lot of tournaments. Even, you got to mix and match, guess among a bunch of guys, but then also it's so rare that the pass attempts pile up. And so, you get 17 receptions spread among all these guys instead of 34 receptions or something. So what you're looking for with Geno or Dalton is you're looking for them just throwing the ball a ton. Xavier Legette, his production has actually risen and fallen with Chuba and Deontay's. If you add Thielen and Legette together, they had 19 DraftKings points in that first game that Dalton started. Legette had 19 DraftKings points in that second game that Dalton started. And then, when Chuba and Deontay went down, Legette went down, right? Like he's a big part of the offense too. So actually I think Dalton triples with Chuba, Deontay, and Legette, which really separates from the way other people will play it, is interesting. And then Geno doubles with JSN and DK, which again, Geno's got high protected ownership, but it's the mindset of like the average DFS player. They want to gravitate towards safety instead of embracing risk. So there's this like higher protected ownership on Geno than on DK or JSN, which just doesn't compute, So it's like, I think Geno can get me 20 to 25 points. Well, don't you want to win a tournament, right? And so if Geno's helping you win a tournament, it's going to be a double stack that wins it. And most people will gravitate toward the single stack. And so, Geno doubles and Dalton doubles or triples.
Yeah, and my guess on that Geno stuff, because I agree with you, is that those ownership projections are largely driven by the algo right now. This is showing up that much in optimals. I do agree that when people go to hand build, I think he's going to be lower on their list of where they'd like to get at quarterback because of those dynamics there. Let's see. I'm trying to think if there are any interesting, we should talk about the Chiefs Niners a little bit. I mean, it's pretty crazy. You have a Super Bowl rematch. Patrick Mahomes, Brock Purdy, these high-powered offenses, and they can't even make the top of the cut here of the games and the players we're talking about. Any thoughts on those two?
Yeah, I mean, are the Chiefs a high-powered offense? Like, this is a year and a half now that they haven't been, and I think that similar to that last year of Brady's career in Tampa, where for like 8-9 weeks, it's like eventually this is going to happen. It's Tom Brady, it's Chris Godwin, it's Mike Evans, and Brady didn't look bad in that offense like that year. He still looked like himself, and it just never came together that season. This is obviously a function of how teams are playing the Chiefs, the weapons that they're down to at this point. But no, I mean, if Mahomes puts up 30 points and beats me, I'll tip my hat to, or 30, I guess, 30 points even doesn't beat me. If you need like 34, 35, I'll tip my hat to whoever played him and beat me with that. And then, Purdy's just taking on such a good defense that he's typically in this, 20 to 25 point range. And I always like him for that because he occasionally can pop up to 28 points or whatever. Chiefs have actually given up, going back to last year, a lot of production on the ground because guys are covered. And so the quarterback has to flush out of the pocket and run the ball. So this could be one of the bigger rushing games for Purdy. He always gets these, 19, 33, 11, 41 yards, right? This could be one of these games where he gets like 30 or 40 rushing yards, but I have a hard time seeing him breaking the slate as well. And not to say that that's not something you could chase in large field play, but definitely not something I'm going after on tighter builds.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think you mentioned Kelsey earlier. I mean, it's like you can get probably a pretty big chunk of the passing production through Kelsey anyway. So we'll get to that when we get to tight ends. And I will just flag, because you kind of got my ears perked when you're talking about Brock Purdy rushing. Just checked on Underdog. They got the number set at 15.5 rushing yards there.
Hammer that.
Past two games, 33 and 19. And then JM gives the stamp of approval on this being a good rushing spot. So good notes there. Any other quarterbacks we haven't gotten a chance to mention before we move on to the running backs?
I mean, I guess we need to mention Love and Stroud to a lesser extent Stroud, but it is one of those spots where Love's only top 28 DraftKings points once in his career. And it was, back in what was that, week 2. So it's not like you're expecting him to win you a tournament, but he has it in him. He throws so many touchdown passes. So if the Texans are able to keep this close, this is one of those where you definitely want to tell a story of like Texans taking a lead. You add Mixon to that roster, or Texans like back and forth type game. You have Diggs or Dell, but Love in large field play is something I'll be going after a little bit. And I honestly wouldn't argue against him on a tighter build if somebody wanted to go that direction.
Yeah. And then, Stroud is an interesting one as well here on the road versus Green Bay. Things obviously a little bit more condensed without Nico in the offense. Any love for the Texans passing game?
Yeah, I mean, primarily at wide receiver, but Stroud has that one tournament winner on his ledger. It was that 39-37 game against Tampa. And so you're hoping for a game like that to develop here. Slower paced Green Bay team, actually kind of interesting. Green Bay and the Texans combined for over 64.5 minutes of time of possession. It's only 60 minutes in a game. So we're going to lose about 9 or 10 plays off what these teams would typically run between them. So that hurts a little bit. Slow paced Packers team. You got the tall grass in Green Bay that also kind of hurts explosiveness for the Texans. So I'm not really pushing my chips in on that, this being that second game of Stroud's career where you had to have him to win a tournament, but that's always in the mix, right? So yeah, not for me, but definitely not a guy that I'll say don't play Stroud this week.
I'm laughing because right before you mentioned literally the height grass in Green Bay, Jason said, tell GM we need that hand in the dirt for this week. I mean, he just got his hand in the literal Lambeau dirt and told you how tall that grass was. What more could you want, Jason? All right, let's head over to running back here. Lots of different directions we can go this week, although I will say doesn't seem like a running back value slate, right? Not a lot sub 6K. Maybe you see something that I'm not seeing, but it seems like a lot of the plays more in the mid range, the 6Ks and 7Ks. What jumps out to you at running back?
Yeah, I like the expensive wide receivers more than any of the expensive running backs. So ideally, I'm not having to pay. I like Saquon just from the narrative standpoint. Not a great matchup, but I like Saquon okay. I like Kyron Williams okay, but I would rather save some salary at running back and free up that salary for expensive wide receivers. But then, like you said, there's not a lot to like sub 5K. the one thing I keep sitting here refreshing, waiting for news on Brian Robinson and his practice on Friday. Because if he's out, that Washington backfield is cheap and very attractive. But outside of that, it's kind of like this 6K to or even like 6.2K up to like 7.3K range for me at running back.
Yep. Yeah. And it looks like as far as projected chalk, Chuba looks popular. Tony Pollard is popular. Kenneth Walker, maybe Aaron Jones here if we get another good practice report from him. At the top, any of that strike you as good chalk or bad chalk?
I'm hesitant to say this because of like how he can explode, but I don't see it with Aaron Jones against this elite Detroit run defense. But I do love his role, and he's going to catch some passes. It's hard for me to see him putting up one of those like 35 pointers that he can do. Pollard is one of these that like I think contrarian minded sharp players want to automatically be like, that's bad chalk. But one of the things that I look at, you and I talk about this on the show, but around this time of year, I start bringing up pre-touchdown fantasy production because touchdowns are kind of the most highly variant component of scoring. And so when we can get a sense of what a player does before their touchdowns, we get a sense of what their role is and how they function within that role. If you just took the names off of kind of all these running backs from 6.3K to honestly all the way up to Kyron Williams, if you took the names off of them, Tony Pollard, you wouldn't know which one was Tony Pollard, right? He fits in with all these other guys. So obviously a lower chance of scoring touchdowns than other guys, given the offense that he's in. But no, I don't mind that play at all. I like the Chuba play, and I like playing it in unique ways, right? Playing it with Dalton and Deontay, playing it with Deontay, playing it with Leggett, playing with all four of those guys. And running back's just a place where to me it's like, how do I not lose this week at running back so that I can spend some salary over at wide receiver?
And is the thought like on Chuba, his role is just so good that basically no matter how that game flows, Panthers lead, close game, they're getting blown out, that he's just going to be able to rack up his touches in any scenario? Yeah,
like going back to pre-touchdown fantasy scoring, like if you compare him to all the other running backs last week, this week, he really should be priced at like 7.5K. So that's just saying what his role is, how he functions within that role. He should be priced at like 7.5K, maybe even higher than that. Now his name is Chuba Hubbard, and we have a long history of him not producing. It took me a little while to come around on him because it was like, come on guys, like we know Chuba Hubbard can't do this, but in this Dave Canales offense, he's doing it. Like Rashad White can't do it either, but in the Dave Canales offense, he was a pretty consistent piece last year. So yeah, Miles Sanders' role has shrunk recently, and to me, it's just a role component of Chuba Hubbard. It's definitely not chalk that I mind. And again, I'll play it differently than the field for the most part, but I like to play.
So you were talking about Geno earlier. Our guy FF Doom in the chat was wondering any thoughts about Geno with Walker, or just kind of your thoughts on Kenneth Walker in a vacuum here.
Yeah, Kenneth Walker back-to-back games with 8 targets. So you got to like that. And Atlanta's been good against the run, but is that really like, do we care too much about that if he's getting 5 to 8 targets? Not really. So yeah, Kenneth Walker, another guy who's in the mix for me. Joe Mixon, another guy in the mix for me. None of the, like, I wish I could pay less for all these guys. But it's just what we have to do, right? And the issue with running back is you can't just go down to a 4K guy and hope for a 15 to 20 pointer. And so you really kind of have to pay for some of these guys. But yeah, it's sort of like, let me get the guys who can get me 20 plus points. Let me not make major mistakes. And then let me, navigate the rest of the slate from there.
Yeah. So, we were talking about a little hard to find value on this slate, sub 6K, anything jumping out to you. I'll throw a few names at you. Chase Brown, who continues to see a bigger role. Kareem Hunt's right at 6K. Maybe any love for Trey Sermon against Miami with no Jonathan Taylor this week? Anything down there?
Not really interested in Kareem Hunt because now we've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire back. And I just it's hard for me to suss out how this backfield is going to be used. Not a great matchup. I shouldn't say no love for Kareem Hunt. I was on him early in the week. I moved off of him. Maybe I'll come back around on him, but you're not saving that much, right? And there's other guys with clearer roles and better matchups. So probably not for me. Nick Chubb is interesting if he comes back this week because it could be one of those things where he only plays 30 snaps, but he gets 20 carries, right? Like they want to ease him in, but then when he's on the field, they want to use him. So I think that's interesting. Probably no interest in Trey Sermon, who, is averaging, I think 2.5 yards a carry this year, 3.8 for his career, has under 500 rushing yards through his 4-year career. But if he's out, Tyler Goodson is really interesting. So that's some value that could open up. And then, we got news right before we came on that Devin Singletary is going to play. So that takes away Tyrone Tracy, who I would have really liked. And now, Tracy's earned a role. So it's kind of a split backfield. And then just to touch on, because we might not get Brian Robinson news, at least until we move off running back, but RB1 plus RB2 against Carolina has basically scored. There was one game with like 29 points. Take out the Vegas game because that one doesn't count because Vegas lost. So the 5 teams that have won against Carolina, one game of 29 points, and then 4 games of 34 plus, including a game of 40 and a game of 46. So we have context for a running back who costs 10.3K, which is what McNichols and Eckler cost together. That was Christian McCaffrey. For a long time, he cost 10.3K, 10.2K. Every week, he was the most popular running back in tournaments, and he would typically score like 28, 29, 30, 32, and occasionally score 34, occasionally he'd score 40. So like this RB1 plus RB2 versus Carolina at 10.3K for the Commanders, like that's a better, or like the production throughout the season against Carolina for 2 running backs has been better than what we used to get for Christian McCaffrey. And then you're averaging 5.2K per running back. You're doing something nobody else is doing. We've done it before, like a couple times in the past in my content, what we call the cheat code, where you play 2 running backs from one team. It's very rare that it makes sense, but this is one of those spots where it makes sense. And that's going to be like, I'm just sitting here refreshing, hoping for Brian Robinson news, because that's going to be by far my favorite way to play things this week, is just throw both those guys onto a roster, and then on some rosters, and then other rosters, just some with McNichols, some with Eckler, and just bet on, this team putting up points on the ground against Carolina.
Yeah, what about some of these plays in the mid-range? Doom asking about Gibbs. Definitely can toss Montgomery into that conversation. You mentioned not being as high as on Aaron Jones, but it sounds like you like that game environment. So what about the Lions running backs? Yeah,
I mean, this game is it's likely to flow through the air. Minnesota faces the lowest opponent rush play rate in the league, the highest opponent pass play rate. Same thing with Detroit, their second highest opponent pass play rate. In pass rate over expectation, they're both, bottom 4 in opponent rush play rates. And so, it's a game that should develop through the air. Gibbs has 3 games in his career, like where he's cracked 30 points. He's really expensive for like his role and what he provides. It's just not a great spot for him to put up that type of score. So he has talent to do that. He'll probably be on the field a little bit more than Montgomery if this kind of leans toward the pass, but not a guy that I'm gravitating toward.
Chris in the chat, he's gravitating to some cheap running backs. Speaking of running backfield supporting 2 guys, Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. Chris is wondering about Tyler Algier. Is that a little too thin this week, or could he get there?
No, I mean, he's going to get 7 to 10 carries. He got 18 last week because they played Carolina, which was, we see this where something happens because of a particular matchup. People chase it the next week with that player, but what you really want to do is chase it in that matchup again. So the likeliest output for Tyler Algier is another 7 to 10 carries, which is pretty thin at 51. You're not saving that much in salary.
Yeah. For
a guy who's getting half the workload of the guys you could pay 20% more in salary for. So that's not for me. Chase Brown is, that's a true split backfield. So that one, I don't have as many arguments against you. Again, you're not saving that much. Like if this were the old days where DraftKings were pricing these guys, at 4,200 or 4,400 or something like that, then that becomes really interesting because you have a situation that you could actually gain some value from, but you're really not saving very much with these guys.
So it sounds like, if I can summarize your thoughts, you'll kind of be mixing and matching in that 6K up to low 7 range, trying to save money for the wide receivers, and then kind of hoping maybe some additional running back value opens up before Sunday.
Yeah, that's the thought. And we've had some not value. Tyrone Tracy wasn't any less expensive than other guys, but I actually liked him more than some of these other guys because he's gonna have like an 85% roll if Singletary was out. So that's already closed off now. But yeah, hopefully something else opened up along the way.
All right, before we move to wide receivers, we got an update on the 1-week season promo code. We're now up to 40% off as this season flies by. You can now use promo code PETE40. So PETE40 will get you 40% off your rest of season 1-week season subs. Jam, what do you guys got going on at the site this week? Let people who might want to check it out know what they're in for if they take the plunge.
Yeah, as always, every game is broken down top to bottom in the NFL Edge. You can find my DFS interpretations for every game in there. If you are not a subscriber, you can have a free account and just get the game breakdowns. Those are completely free. You can also find those on the 1 Week Season podcast feed, completely free. You can find a bunch of other podcasts as well. My Angles podcast is free. I'll just keep mentioning the free stuff. And then the scroll is kind of the stuff that we talk about in this show, where it's not just player focused, but also the strategy components. And so that's why we see a lot of OWS pennants at the top of the leaderboard, or OWS members who don't use the OWS pennant, is not just because we are good at uncovering good plays. Lots of sites are good at that, but also because we really teach the strategy stuff, and we do that weekly. And so you'll find a lot of the strategy content there in the scroll. And then also want to mention the NBA coming up, and we've got Props Insider, which last year, if you followed all the bets, it would have been $25,000 in profit plus 250 units. So, or put that in context, even if you did $20 a unit, that's plus 5K in profit, and you don't have to do anything like besides place the bets. They do all the research, they find the bets, they give them to you. We've got 2 years of data that's like plus 350 units, and NBA is the most profitable season. And the code Pete takes 20% off of your week pass there, your month pass there, or your full 12-month pass there. So another thing to think about checking out.
Yeah, exactly. And that distinction Jam made, the Pete 40 is for those rest of season stuff in NFL, but the regular Pete will be good on the weekly passes.
Regular Pete's still 20% off on week passes on the Bink machine, which is already down to $99 for the rest of the year. So that knocks it down to about $80. So yeah, Pete takes 20% off weekly passes and 12-month subscriptions that have not seen a discount. Pete 40 is for rest of season NFL DFS subscriptions.
The other thing I'll mention too, and I mentioned this for when I do my cram shows on Sunday morning, because a lot does change from when we're talking about stuff right now. We're kind of talking in hypotheticals about how the slate could break in one way or the other. JM's player grid, he'll obviously have that populated over the weekend, but then you'll get his updated thoughts on Sunday morning, which I always like checking in on, because it's like, what are the things that maybe we've changed our mind on? So make sure you take advantage of that to not only consuming the content during the week, but as kind of, new things and new information come in, getting JM's up-to-date thoughts.
Yeah. I added 20% Chris Godwin on like Saturday afternoon last week. So that was in the Sunday morning update. And I always update what my exposures are. So that's, I think, pretty useful as well, just to get a sense of where my head is. If you want to, it's all, checks and balances, balancing your thoughts of somebody else's is a useful way to kind of attack DFS. And so finding things you might have overlooked or things that you might want to think about. I have all those updates on Sunday mornings or, late Saturday nights.
For sure. Yeah. I often find myself where it's like, I have an angle that I like. And then you're like, okay, now what's the secondary piece here? How do I finish this out? And sometimes that's where I really like to go and get some ideas for some maybe one-off plays that I haven't been considering yet on the slate. Let's head to wide receiver. This is definitely where the meat of the conversation can reside today, because there are a ton of good plays. I mean, we can start right at the top. Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, Malik Nabers, Jamar Chase, just to name a few here. What are you seeing at the top of the wide receiver position?
Yeah, to me, the four that stand out are Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, AJ Brown, and Malik Nabers. Stephon Diggs, I really don't like the price tag, but he's kind of in that mix because of the way that this Texans offense functions and how narrow their distribution of targets is. And if Cooper Kupp returns, he's a little bit interesting, but you got to imagine that, the Rams could control this game. You got to imagine that they might ease him in a little bit. So there's big risk there. Jamar Chase, I kind of went through this week, the way that he has produced 30+ point games in his career. I think he's got 61 games with 11 games of 30+ DraftKings points. And like 9 of those have been high scoring games, right? So typically, just because of the way that Zach Taylor calls an offense, the way that this Bengals team plays, typically you need a high scoring game for Jamar Chase to hit. And I don't expect the Browns to do well on offense. So I'm not really big on him. Drake London, I'll let other people chase him. But yeah, that's kind of these four guys I mentioned are the main guys I like up here at the top.
Yeah. And, obviously you get both of those guys in those particular game environments there. You mentioned liking Daniel Jones. AJ Brown, I think he's an interesting one maybe to discuss on his own, because not quite as interested in Jalen Hurts at his elevated salary. So sounds like if you do get to AJ Brown, it would be in Nabers, Daniel Jones lineups, or just as a one-off.
Yeah, I like him with Nabers and Daniel Jones. You can play it either way. Yeah, with AJ Brown, he talking pre-touchdown fantasy production, like last year in his first 8 games, you remember he got kind of dinged up as the season went along. In his first 8 games, he had 20 plus pre-DraftKings or pre-touchdown DraftKings points in 6 out of 8 games, which is just insane production. You think about typically DraftKings is going to price these guys so that if they hit a 2-touchdown game, they go 4x their salary. And then for more expensive guys, if they hit a 2x game, they get up to about 30 points. So when AJ Brown's scoring 20, 22, 24, 26, 27 points before touchdowns, that gives him pathways for a 2-touchdown game to be 39 points, 38 points, 36 points, whatever. And then this year already, he's picked right back up his 2 games this year, both 20 plus pre-touchdown games. And I don't remember which numbers are which, but one of these 2 teams, Philadelphia and the Giants, one of them ranks 27th in DVOA against wide receiver ones, and the other ranks 32nd in DVOA against wide receiver ones. So obviously Malik Nabers, you're likelier to see the passing volume. You're likelier to see like 13, 14 targets than you are for AJ Brown. But it's actually really interesting. The Giants force a really high opponent pass play rate. They got Dexter Lawrence in the middle. Teams don't want to run against them. They face a really high opponent pass play rate. They don't filter targets away from alpha wideouts. They've played 6 alpha wide, like legit alpha wideouts this year, and I think only one of them has seen double-digit targets because the Giants have been really great at time of possession. One of the top teams at time of possession. They're allowing the 3rd fewest opponent plays per game. But this is one of the spots where that can shift, right? And all of a sudden, the Eagles run extra plays, and instead of seeing 8 or 9 targets, AJ Brown has 11 or 12 targets. So, it's a good spot for, especially Nabers will be popular. AJ Brown won't be, so that kind of creates some separation in the way that you're playing these guys. So yeah, I like both of them. And again, like all these guys up here can hit. It's just a question of who's likeliest to hit and where do we get the most expected value. So these are the guys I'm seeing.
It sounds like you would you use I think Terry McLaurin's going to end up being maybe even more popular than his ownership indicates right now, just because if Jaden Daniels is the most popular quarterback, he's such a clean stack with Daniels. Would you play McLaurin solo without Daniels, or is that just kind of a stay away spot for you because you like it on the ground?
I don't think I'll play McLaurin either way. If I were playing him, God, he needs like 30. He needs like 30 points to justify his price tag. I mean, if you get 26, 27, you're pretty happy. But in terms of you don't play him, he needs like 35 to bury you, which he's maybe done, I don't know, once or twice in his career. And you just don't expect heavy passing volume here. So if you want to play McLaurin, I don't think that you have to play him with Jaden Daniels, because the at those price tags that doesn't correlate to Jaden Daniels having a tournament winner if McLaurin has a tournament winner. But even Noah Brown, who's the number 2 wideout on this offense and is 4K, isn't a guy I'm like really excited to play because I just don't see the passing volume piling up here. And it hasn't through, 6 games against Carolina. But I would be willing to play him without Jaden Daniels.
What about, Tyreek Hill? They're coming off the bye here. The Colts defense has been really bad. Obviously, the Dolphins quarterback situation has been equally bad. Any chance Tyreek Hill can get home here?
Yeah, there was a thought of mine early in the week, like, ooh, Tyreek Hill, he's only 7,300. Jaden Waddle's like, 5,300 or something. Yeah. And then we had a text thread conversation yesterday with Mike Johnson and Hilo and Zandamir. And I think it was Hilo and Mike were talking about, Tyreek Hill coming off the bye, and maybe they figured this out. And then Zandamir was like, I think a lot of sharp players are going to think this, and the ownership's going to creep up higher than you might think. And when I was Tyler Huntley's career, I think it's 11 starts, 12 starts, something like that. He's never produced a 100-yard wide receiver. He's never topped 232 passing yards. And then he's got like 4 games where Mark Andrews smashed. So something about like throwing the ball up the seam to Mark Andrews meshed well for Tyler Huntley, but he just doesn't mesh well with wide receivers, and he's not a very good quarterback. So yeah, I don't know. When I watch the Mike McDaniel offense, it's so unique in that there was a play right before Tua got hurt where he acted like he turned the wrong way on the handoff and then kind of bobbled the ball and then turned and pitched it the other way. And all of that's orchestrated to where Mike McDaniel knows exactly how the defense, according to their rules, is going to react when certain things happen. So it's like if Tua turns the wrong way and fumbles acts like he's messing with the ball. Like the defense is going to react a certain way, and that's going to open up space over here for this pitch. It's like Mike McDaniel has such a good feel for that stuff that I hesitate to think he can't figure this out over a bye week. But Tyler Huntley has really been like put a damper on the opportunities for this offense to do well. So yeah, I mean, I was looking at Achane, I was looking at Mostert, I was looking at Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Yeah, I mean, I could see Tyreek Hill hitting. I don't know if I'm going to go there myself.
You had mentioned obviously liking Geno. You mentioned Metcalf, mentioned not necessarily loving the London price tag in ownership. Is there anything you'll be doing with the Falcons passing game if you play this game as a bit of a shootout?
Yeah, Mooney and Ray McLeod as bringbacks. So Seattle also second lowest opponent average depth of target in the NFL. So they're trying to force short passes, but they've also given up a lot of explosives. So Deebo Samuel had over 100 yards on 3 catches. Jameson Williams had 80 yards on 2 catches. Darius Slayton had, I think it was 8 catches, but 120 something yards or 140 something yards, whatever it was. And he had like a 41 yard catch in there. So they're giving up these big plays. And so to me, the volume guy, the guy who needs 13, 14 targets to produce a tournament winner, which is Drake London, he's not as attractive to me as the guy who could bust a big play, which is Darnell Mooney or Ray McLeod. So I will have those guys, but probably only as bringbacks on those rosters with Geno.
And I think you briefly mentioned him when we were talking about Geno, but did you say you like this spot for JSN as well?
Yeah. I think that the double stacks of DK and JSN is the way to go with Geno. Again, like these targets that you see here, what is it, 16, 12, and 9? All 3 of those games correspond with heavy target games for DK Metcalf. All 3 of those correspond with heavy pass attempt games for Geno Smith. So just based on the over-under here and the Falcons being favored, and the fact that you have to drive the ball against Atlanta, you're not going to hit big plays. This could turn into one of those games where you just see both guys hitting for double-digit targets. They've had a game where they combined for 20, a game where they combined for 24, a game where they combined for 30 targets. So if you get 25 to 30 targets from JSN and DK, you're in great shape, right? In PPR scoring.
Yeah.
So I like JSN, but I primarily like him paired with DK, paired with Geno. I don't think I'll have a lot of those 2 away from my Geno rosters.
That makes sense. I wanted to circle back on the Texans wide receivers. You had mentioned maybe not as much interested in Stroud, but maybe some interest in one-off stuff here, maybe with some Green Bay pieces.
Yeah, we're at 11 out of 23 games since the start of last year, where at least one wideout on this team put up 26 plus DraftKings points. So this is a spot, right? Should be a high scoring game. Green Bay gives up a lot of downfield throws, a lot of splash plays. And so Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, we talk about this, right? DraftKings typically prices players in such a way that they'll hit roughly 4x their salary, roughly 25% of the time. So if you say one of the Texans wide receivers hits roughly 50% of the time, and there's 2 guys that you're guessing between, that's roughly 25% of the time. So then if you have a game environment where it's like, oh, well, this is a spot where it's going to happen more than 50% of the time, then both these guys become plus EV. So Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs, I don't think either of them, like there's enough to really pinpoint on this slate that, like, cause I've had weeks where just like last year, where just the fact that one of Nico or Tank Dell was going to hit, it was like, well, 60% of my rosters is going to have one of these 2 guys, right? This week has things that I feel more confident in than the split between these 2. So I won't just be firing a ton of bullets at them, but I'll definitely usually have like 10 to 13 single entry 3 max rosters. Definitely like one of those will have Tank Dell this week. One of those will have Stephon Diggs, and I'll have, some level of exposure to them in large field play.
You mentioned, wanting to mostly get up at wide receiver this week, although I'm guessing like if you are paying up, you're going to need some value savers. You mentioned the Falcons guys. Anything else here, sub 5K even that you like? I'll throw a few names at you. Jordan Whittington, if Kupp doesn't go, Trey Tucker, there's Juju. Anything stand out to you? Yeah.
If Kupp doesn't go, Whittington's a sharp play, 8 and 10 targets the last 2 weeks. I think it is. Ray McLeod is in that mix. Trey Tucker, I'm going to consider last week's game from Tucker a complete dud. I mean, a complete outlier. It was a dud. You don't have to consider it that. I'm going to consider it a complete outlier until like proven otherwise. If Jacoby Myers plays, then that takes a little bit off of Tucker. But if Jacoby Myers is out, I really like Trey Tucker. And Juju was one of those where, same as what I said about Pollard, like the instincts of naturally contrarian players is going to be like, oh, this is bad chalk. He just had a huge game, but I don't know that it is. You know, he's 4K in salary. He was in this very same role 2 years ago where they had nobody else. It's like McCole Hardman and Sky Moore and Juju, right? And he had, I forget the number now, but it was like 5 games of 17 plus DraftKings points and a game of 25, a game of 28 against San Francisco. And so, you know, he's one of these guys at 4K. If he puts up 4 to 8 points, it really doesn't kill your roster. You'd love for him to put up more than that, but it doesn't kill your roster because you got to save salary somewhere. And most of these salary savers are not going to put up a strong score. But he has pathways to 20 plus points. And just because he did it his last game out doesn't mean that it's point chasey to go there. So I like Juju. Noah Brown, again, like just great offense, great matchup. The question is just how much volume do we see in this spot? Rosters that build around that Detroit and Minnesota game can include Tim Patrick, a guy who's playing around 40% of the snaps, but getting some downfield throws, and they really like him in that offense on that team. He fits really well with that team. And then DJ Turner, if Jacoby Myers is out, another cheap guy that you can throw in there. We're looking for cheap guys who can go for 15 to 20 points, even though they'll probably get you 3 to 6 to 7, because that's what you sometimes need in order to win tournaments is like defense, right? You need to guess on a defense and hope they get 15 to 17 points. You need to guess on a cheap wide receiver at this point in the season and hope that they get that 15-point game. And if they don't, you can still win without them doing it, but that's the only way to kind of get that upside built into your roster in other spots.
A couple other situations I wanted to ask you for. Obviously, we had the Browns have looked awful, but they do ship away Amari Cooper. Does Jerry Jeudy or Elijah Moore jump out to you as values in this new landscape?
Yeah, I'm hesitant to just cross Jeudy off my list because he hasn't topped 20 DraftKings points since 2022, but also in that year, he put up like some 28 pointers, some 30 pointers. And we've seen Amari do it with Deshaun Watson. I mean, this has been there's like a number of advanced metrics that basically say Deshaun Watson has been the worst quarterbacks this year, has been the worst quarterback since like Johnny Manziel and Jamarcus Russell, like 2 guys who never watched film, right? Like and didn't take their job seriously. It's a bad situation this year. And early in the season, when I kept looking at it was like the numbers from 2022 with Watson and Amari, the numbers from 2023. And it's like, oh, like Watson's going to keep getting better, but really he was at his best in 2022. He got worse in 2023. He's gotten worse in 2024. So it's ugly, but I don't want to just totally discount it. Also, from that conversation earlier of just thinking about value in terms of salary and points you can get, David Njoku at 4.1K, who's never had a big game with Deshaun Watson, or I guess maybe he's had one big game with Deshaun Watson, like an 18-pointer, but they don't mesh well either. But you treat him like a 4.1K wide receiver playing in the flex, right? Like that's another place to save salary right there. So I'm not going to argue against these Browns guys. They're not like high confidence plays, but they're cheap enough in a good enough spot that, they're worth considering for sure.
All right. While we're doing this value conversation, I'm going to capitulate to something I've seen in the chat. I don't know where this steam is coming from, but I have seen Jalen Coker's name mentioned multiple times. People are going berserk for a 3K wide receiver on the Panthers. Granted, we don't have any news yet on Deontay Johnson's status with his rib stuff. Why is everyone obsessed with Jalen Coker right now? I didn't know he was on the radar, Jam.
No, I didn't either. 4 targets, 3 targets his last 2 games. I don't know what his snap count has been, which is critical, right? McCole Hardman had 4 targets last week. He played 8 snaps, but let's pull up his usage report over there.
So here you go. So routes 4, 5, 6, they have jumped 10%, 64, 75%. Last week he had 8% of the targets, 12% of the targets.
I mean, no, that's not sharp.
Nothing.
That's Tim Patrick, basically. I mean, that's the same play as Tim Patrick. If everybody's talking about him in chat, then that seems like somebody who's going to gain steam, and then you're like, well, I'll play Tim Patrick or DJ Turner over him. But no, like a 10% target share is pretty standard for a wide receiver 3. And in a spot where you'd expect Carolina to have to throw the ball a lot. No, I like that shout.
All right, there you go. You get the Jam stamp of approval. It was funny you were mentioning the kind of onslaughting, the Carolina passing game. I did that in one of my lineups last week. I ended up using Jatavian Sanders, who I had kind of liked as a punt play. But maybe one of these weeks we'll get back to the Dalton 3 touchdown game. The only other wide receiver I wanted to ask you about, just because he's been really good, but the quarterback play can certainly impact his role, and that would be Josh Downs. How are you feeling about, what he's done this season and then what it means with Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I mean, I will the first, I shouldn't say the first tournament winner. Alec Pierce produced a tournament winner, but the first tournament winner from Pittman or Downs that comes with Anthony Richardson at quarterback, I'll probably miss it. But I'll just have to resign myself to that, just because that's not where I want to go. Yeah, I don't want to attach my money to Anthony Richardson wide receivers, and maybe if Downs gets there this week, he gets there through Anthony Richardson. Right now, I'll have some Anthony Richardson, so I kind of get to ride those points. But yeah, I won't be going there.
All right. The chat is just in fuego with Jalen Coker talk. Our friend John Daigle replaced Mingo in 3 wide receiver sets. Apparently he was mentioned in OWS. Searching for Ceiling mentioned him today. So here's where all the,
I love that. That's by the way, that's my favorite listen. Rich Rebar, Hilo, always sort of like their last little 10% that it pushes me over the top of my thoughts on the week. So Searching for Ceiling, if you guys don't listen to that, it's on YouTube. It's on the OWS podcast feed. Lord Reeves from Sharp Football Analysis and Hilo from OWS. Really great listen each week.
While we're kind of bouncing around here, I did remember there was one situation I glossed over, and I've gotten a couple questions about it in the chat. Thoughts on the Miami running backs? We get a comment about Mostert here. Someone had mentioned Devon Achane earlier. Any thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, I mean, they're just being dragged down by the offense as a whole. And so all the unique things that they do to trick a defense, like last year, there were just all these open running lanes, and those haven't been there because the passing attack isn't there and the quarterback play isn't there. But like I said, I was digging deep into that earlier in the week. I wasn't ever able to come around on it, but it was certainly something that was on my radar. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. Yeah.
And it like you said too, the, if they were priced a little cheaper, if we were getting Tyler Huntley discounts here to mess around, but 6,700, 6,100, there's a pretty big opportunity cost with those guys. Any other wide receivers, Jam? Obviously, we're trying to cover a lot of ground. We mentioned there's some fragile situations here. Deontay Johnson, Cooper Kupp. Any other wide receiver spots we haven't specifically talked about? Maybe the Packers wide receivers.
Yeah, I mean, anything we haven't hit, obviously I'll hit it in the player grid if I'm interested in it. But I think we should leave at least a little bit of space for tight end today, because it is kind of an interesting tight end week.
Yeah, let's do that. We are just slightly ahead of schedule here, so let's hop over to tight ends. I will just mention this week my 2 premium shows here for those of you guys who are YouTube members, like Justin, double Justins here becoming YouTube members. I do 2 premium shows a week, one on Saturday nights, DFS After Dark, generally an interview series, but this weekend I decided to do a solo one. So I'm going to crack a few drinks, do some drafts, do some lineup builds, answer any of your questions. And then Sunday we'll have the cram 10:30 a.m. That's where we do all the overnight news, latest ownership, best GPP plays, all of that good stuff. And also, generally those are tiered. Hand Builder and Opto Bros tier gets you access to all of those. Best Ball Value Hounds get you access to the interviews. But the person, Jam, who won the Battle Royale this week for $50,000 came through on Monday and gifted 50 YouTube memberships. But the way that they do the tiers, it's the lowest tier. But I'm opening it up this week. So if you're a YouTube member of any level, both of those shows will you'll have access to this weekend. So thank you again to Goat Napped, and become a YouTube member, and you can watch those 2 shows this weekend. All right, Jam, like you said, normally you are loath to talk about tight ends, but today you seem a little more jazzed up to talk tight ends. So
I would say that we squeeze it out, right? Because who wants to listen to it? And I wouldn't say that I'm that excited about it. It's just like we're getting to the point in the season where value's tighter, and all of a sudden, like, maybe tight end is the place to go for value, and not just at the tight end position, but potentially even in the flex. Let's start at the top. And to me, Kelsey's a sharp play. Kittle's kind of this, like, probably has a bad game, but he also has slate breaking ceiling, so you think about him. And then Bowers, I just wanted to lay this out. Taking pre-touchdown fantasy points, and this is including games that Devontae Adams played, before he was really the central focal point. If you just put all of these players into the flex position, took the names off them, the positions off them, Bowers should be priced around like 6.5K to 7K. And he's 6K or 5,800 at a position where it's much harder to find good scores. And he's playing a defense that ranks 32nd in DVOA against the tight end position. So I think he's just a super sharp play this week. And then there's no cheap tight end I like. It's just this function of what is there to like at cheap wide receiver. And then you look over at cheap tight end and it's like, okay, well, there's this guy who should score like 6 to 12 points. This guy who should score 5 to 12 points. This guy who should score 6 to 12 points, right? So I'm just going to rattle off names real quickly. Geno Smith, who is very much like needs schemed usage, but he's had schemed usage in a couple games already. Geno Smith, Colby Parkinson, David Njoku, Grant Calcaterra, Theo Johnson, Zach Ertz, Dalton Schultz. I think all those guys just kind of fall into this bucket of one of them probably going to top 10 or 11 or 12 points, and there could be no wide receivers sub 4K who do that. And so that's just one of the ways to look to save salary this week.
Yeah, and I really like that angle. I would say you mentioned the volatility with Kittle. I think everyone's pretty aware of that at this point. But say with Kelsey and Bowers, to compare Bowers at 5,800 to the wide receivers going at 5,800, and then take some of those punts you talked about, like a Calcaterra or even a Dalton Schultz, and compare them to the wide receivers in the 4,200, 3,800. And it's like, I feel like you could be winning on both of those fronts. Bowers versus the equal wide receivers, and the punt tight end versus the punt wide receiver. So I really like that angle. Yeah.
And it's never comfortable to do, but to me, it's like, well, where else are you finding value that you're comfortable with? Trey Tucker, Juju Smith-Schuster, assuming that we get injury, situations playing in our favor, you can pull that. You can pull one of these cheap tight ends. You can still play Bowers, and you can fit in a couple of these higher priced guys that you might want to play.
How do you right now, as far as obviously, anytime you can kind of toss in a cheap tight end with your quarterback, I don't think anyone's ever going to say that's a bad idea when you're making a bet on the quarterback. But outside of that, are you thinking of any correlation angles? Like, do you ever like playing, an opposite, tight end from a wide receiver in the game? Or do you just basically think about these plays in a vacuum? Like, if you like Kelsey, like, you don't have to force anything else within that game.
Yeah, every situation's unique, right? To where, to me, it's more about this building block we'll get to in a moment, or the AJ Brown and Malik Nabers situation where they do play off each other, because if they're both hitting for big play, downfield plays, right? They're both hitting for big plays, and most people can't play them together. Like, AJ Brown has potential to put up a 40-point score, and Nabers has potential to put up a 40-point score, and there's potential that nobody else on the slate tops 30 points. And then it's like, who has those two scores together? Only you. So those are places where I like the correlation, because there's a huge strategy edge as well. But I'm not just automatically looking like, oh, I'm playing Kelsey, so I'm going to play somebody from the 49ers. It's more about, what story does this Kelsey play tell? Well, this Kelsey play just tells a story of a competitive game where Kelsey's the guy that they're leaning on. And also, the 49ers, they give up so much underneath production. That's why I like Juju, and why Juju had a 28-point game against them last year, because like, they're not the Chiefs where they're trying to throw a bunch at you and trap your quarterback into mistakes and all that. Like, the 49ers are saying, we have elite players. We're going to force you to march the field and see if you make a mistake. So last year, Laporta had 97 yards against them on like 8 catches. Kelsey's got 2 games over the last couple of years of 90+ yards on a bunch of catches. Trey McBride had a 10 catch for 100-yard game. There was one other elite tight end who had a strong game against them. And so it's like, how are you going to march the field if you're the Chiefs? You throw the ball to Kelsey, and that could still mean a 16-20 game, and just Kelsey gets 9 catches for 90 yards and scores a touchdown, and he's an ideal play to play, but nobody else from this game is.
Yeah. And the one specific one I wanted to ask you about, how much of because Colby Parkinson was looking good to me, but I'm curious, how big of a deal is it for you if Kupp plays, as far as liking him at 3,800?
I mean, I don't know that I like Parkinson. He's just in the same bucket with all these other guys.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it changes much. Kind of what I always think there is, if Kupp plays, that's fewer targets for Parkinson, but also less attention on Parkinson. So more opportunities for him to be open. So I think it all kind of evens out.
Yeah. And I do expect if Dallas Goedert is ruled out, I do think Calcaterra will gain a good amount of steam here at 3,200. Played pretty good last week. How would you think about that? Because I know you said you're not playing Hurts. You do like AJB. Could you ever see yourself playing like an AJB, Calcaterra, in that game environment, but without the quarterback?
Yeah. I mean, I could see that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean it's a pricing thing, right? Like where especially if you're playing Daniel Jones and you're playing that game to go nuts and you're able to get Jones, Nabers, AJB, and Grant, like that doesn't seem that crazy to me.
No, I mean definitely as a double on a bring back, but even independent of a quarterback from that game, I think it could make sense.
Yep. Any other tight ends you want to shout out? I know you kind of gave us your short list there. It does seem like David Njoku is going to be fairly popular here this week. If he is chalk, let's say, north of 20%, does that strike you as a good, neutral, or bad play?
I always think in terms of like how much exposure do I want? So I would be underweight the field on him, but I'm not. I don't ever fade guys that I like, and I think that's a trap that people fall into is like, and I've done that before and I had to learn a lesson and realize, oh, that's not the way I want to play, but, oh, this guy's going to be popular now, I'm not going to play him. And so to me, it's like, no, he's just remains he's never like meshed with Deshaun Watson. It's not a good fit. Deshaun Watson's not really a good fit with anyone right now, but even like this whole time when Watson was playing decently, he wasn't a good fit with Njoku, and that's not Njoku's fault, obviously, but because we saw what he did with Joe Flacco last year. But yeah, to me, it's like he's a solid play in terms of what he costs, like what his range of outcomes is compared to wide receivers who cost the same thing. So I'll be underweight the field because he's just kind of in that bucket of lower cost guys I'm willing to throw darts at, but no, I wouldn't fade him just because other people are on him heavily.
All right. It's time to get these ideas on their feet and build a lineup. Let's roll up our sleeves here, Jam. All right, you guys are in luck again with the Deposit Kingdom Weekly League. We're running it back at 1,200 entries. Right now, it is at 1,015. This will fill by tomorrow sometime. So if you want to get in this contest, it is a $10 rake-free 3-max contest. I review the winning lineups on the Portfolio Review Show every Monday morning. But the only place you can get the link to register for this contest is in the Deposit Kingdom Discord. It is in the announcement section. The Deposit Kingdom Discord link is in the description down below. Hop in there, get registered, and you can compete with us in a very fun 3-max tournament. JM, where are we starting for the block this week?
All right. We are going to go with the New York Penthouse. No, sorry, the Minnesota Penthouse. We also have the New York Penthouse in the player.
How many penthouses do you have?
Which is Malik Nabers and AJ Brown. Just pay up for both guys in the city of New York. Minnesota Penthouse, though, Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. And this is similar. We've already touched on this with AJ Brown and Malik Nabers, but it's this idea of actually last year when we talked already about how much passing volume we expect in this game. Already the Vikings, it's interesting, right? Sam Darnold hasn't topped 31 pass attempts, but that's just a function of the way that their games have played out. They're still 4th in the NFL in pass rate over expectation. Last year when Josh Dobbs was the quarterback, when Nick Mullins was the quarterback, this team was still pass heavy in terms of pass rate over expectation. Kevin O'Connell likes to bias his offense through the air. So we've had 5 games where the Vikings jumped out to a big lead. Even their close games, they were in a huge lead, and then the other team crept back. So we have not had a game yet where, Sam Darnold has had to pass a bunch, but in close games, that's what's going to happen. And against Detroit, who forces passes through the air, that's going to happen. Detroit likes to bias their offense to the ground, but they should pass the ball more than normal in this spot. So last year, these two in 2 games, Minnesota and Detroit, these two combined for 62 DraftKings points, and I think it was 68 DraftKings points. And it's the same thing we mentioned earlier with Nabers and AJ Brown. The people who are getting the Jefferson score are probably not getting the Amon-Ra St. Brown score, and vice versa. So if these guys could easily put up the 2 highest wide receiver scores on the slate. If that happens and people are only getting one of those scores and you're getting 2, you're moving out of the field. So next thing is, we got to figure out how to make it work. But I think this is a really sharp angle to play this week. And we can throw Sam Darnold on this roster as the kind of next piece, because if we want to save salary at quarterback, we'd be going down to like Daniel Jones, but then we want to play Malik Nabers with him because Daniel Jones isn't posting a tournament winner without Malik Nabers having a nice game. So we'll go Sam Darnold and then kind of see what we can do from here.
Yeah, and it's like both Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra with their roles, like are there games where they have huge PPR days and the game doesn't fully shoot out and, they're getting 25 to 28 points and you're kind of happy with it. But like the story this lineup is telling is this game goes nuts and you're going to want one of the quarterbacks in that situation. Yeah,
exactly. And ideally the game, this is a game that is feeding, these guys are feeding off each other, right? So it's not just 2 high-priced wide receivers that other people can't fit. It's not, Justin Jefferson and Malik Nabers, where it's like, hey, a lot of people won't be able to find a way to fit this. It's like if Jefferson's having a big game, it directly feeds into Amon-Ra St. Brown, hopefully having a big game. And that's what we really like about this. And speaking of like passing volume, right? Piling up, you could throw Jordan Addison onto this in both those games last year. One of them, KJ Osborne, scored 20 points. The other one, Jordan Addison, scored 15 points. But we might need to go cheaper than that. So we'll hold off on that for now. And then, yeah, I think the next thing is to figure out where we can save salary. So let's swing over to defense, where
I was going to just think the same thing. Yeah.
Giants defense is number 1 in adjusted sack rate in the NFL. And Philadelphia is actually, again, this Kellen Moore offense not really fitting super well with Jalen Hurts so far. They're near the bottom of the league in adjusted sack rate on offense. So we saved some salary here. And then this also kind of tells a story of potentially that game not taking off. And therefore, like 2 other expensive wide receivers, including one popular one, maybe not having top of range type scores. So that helps us kind of clear out a path to a first place finish. And then we can put in one of these cheap tight ends and let's go ahead and throw in Grant. I said Calcaterra earlier. You said Calcaterra. I'm guessing you're right. So let's throw in Calcaterra at 3,200. And what we're going to see here is, hey, we've actually got some salary to work with in this spot. So we're obviously going to need cheap flex or affordable flex and cheap wide receiver in order to fit in running backs. But what I'd like to do next is go with this Brock Bowers and Juju Smith-Schuster and see what this allows us to do at running back. And I'll also mention, like, given how thin value is and the way teams have played against Carolina, I don't mind throwing Jeremy McNichols onto some rosters because if Brian Robinson's coming back with this knee issue, we've already seen him get carries. We know that they'd probably like to rest Eckler. Like, we could see McNichols getting 12 to 15 touches in this game. What I really like about the Juju and Brock Bowers one, because we're always talking strategy, right? We're always thinking about how do we clear out our paths to a first place finish, is Bowers or Kelsey. Well, if Juju is putting up a big game, that's probably preventing Kelsey from putting up a tournament winner. So that clears out the pathway to Bowers putting up the tournament winner, because most people won't play 2 tight ends. So it's like the people who are getting the Bowers score now you want Kelsey to not put up a similar score, because, like, let's say Bowers, just throwing out numbers for examples, Bowers is 20% owned, Kelsey's 20% owned. They both put up 30 points. Well, even though you got that big score from Bowers, you're competing against 40% of the field. So ideally, you want Kelsey to disappoint in this spot. And so I really like, there's a lot of cool ways you can play these Kansas City and Las Vegas pieces, whether it's like playing Trey Tucker and Juju together, which most people won't do, or Kelsey and Bowers together, which most people won't do, or your Tucker rosters think about putting on Kelsey, your Juju rosters think about putting on Bowers. There's really fun strategy angles there. I guess it's time to make the chat vomit and throw McNichols on this. Do it. And we're going to then see, like, we've got quite a bit to work with here at our last running back spot. And 7,100, right? So that gets us up into the range of guys that we like at the running back position.
Yeah. And just a couple of notes here. One, we did actually just get some update on Juju. I know there was some concern about the hamstring injury, but Andy Reid just said Juju will play Sunday against the Niners, had the hamstring spasms that forced him out of Thursday's practice early, but he returned to practice today. And he said he only listed him as questionable when the injury report came out, just in case he had a setback. So I think we're okay there. And I love getting the McNichols. I've heard some whispers of, JM, these lineups have been pretty chalky, whatever. We're not getting the galaxy brain stuff. I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't want to hear it. We just put Jeremy McNichols in this lineup here with Juju and Calcaterra and all this good stuff. So that does give us 7,100, which is, it's an interesting spot depending on how you feel about Bijan, or is this a spot where you'd go and rework things to try to get up to like a Kenneth Walker or something else? Yeah,
I would personally rework things in the two places that don't wreck our thesis on this roster where we could rework things are defense or that tight end spot. And so we could go down to Theo Johnson at 2,800, who, has also been running a lot of routes for this Giants offense, and also kind of plays off that, taking away points from Nabers. And that would give us the flexibility to go to Kenneth Walker or go to Joe Mixon up at the top here, another running back who I like. Or we could, like I said, we could also go down at defense, although Giants is kind of as low as I feel super comfortable going here. So in the interest of time, let's do this and throw in whichever of those running backs you want to throw in, Kenneth Walker or Joe Mixon. And again, like, if you don't like, not that any of you hopefully are taking this roster and then just like reworking it for yourself. But you can move off of Bowers and then you can move up from McNichols. Like there's different ways you can do this. But what I really wanted to illustrate was that you can build these Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson rosters, and there are ways to do it, right? If you move off of Bowers, then that gives you freedom at running back, exactly. To, you know, in 3,900, you can get down to Trey Tucker and like move one other piece around. Kenneth Walker down to Joe Mixon. You've got Trey Tucker. Is Trey Tucker 4,200? Okay, he's 4,200 this week. But yeah, you can move off of Hubbard down to Tony Pollard. You can move down to Joe Mixon. You've got Pollard and Mixon. So like there are ways to fit in. And honestly, like this is a pretty sharp. Yeah, that's a pretty sharp build right there. It's a pretty sharp build right there with Theo Johnson.
A twinkle in your eye
that you don't feel great about. But yeah, like there are ways to work this penthouse type of build where you're going to get these 2 high-priced wide receivers and make it work to where you still have a roster that's keeping you on track for 200 plus points, where you've got guys like Trey Tucker and Juju who can outperform their salary. And just like some fun stuff that you can do this week with some of these higher priced wide receivers.
Yeah. Good stuff as always, JM. Immediately following this show, I'm going to be heading over to do Off and On the Clock with the Badge Bros. Very similar structure to this show, except we are doing it all through a lens of underdog and going through all of the top plays there. We'll do tournament strategy for both the 6-person contest, the 12-person. We'll do small field strategy, large field, all of that good stuff. JM, any parting shots for you here before you try not to bump your head on the ceiling of that attic you're in today?
Yeah, check back on Sunday morning, because especially on this week, I'm sure there will be some things that change on my end, in my mind, with all the news we're waiting on. But my player grid should have about 80 to 85% of my thoughts in place, and then we'll finish things up on Sunday morning. Usually get that posted around, usually I'm on the West Coast. This week I'm on the East Coast. So usually get that posted around 1 or 2 a.m. on the West Coast. So this week it'll be like 1 or 2 a.m. on the East Coast. So you guys can check back, find that. And yeah, let's go make some money this week.
Let's do it. And again, final reminder there, we do have that extra 10% off this week. Promo code Pete40 will get you 40% off your 1 week rest of season packages, or you can go and sample it. A weekly pass, promo code Pete will get you 20% off of that. Good luck this weekend, guys. I will see you over on Off and On the Clock. We got the premium shows this weekend, and then back with the portfolio review to put a bow on week 7 on Monday. For JM, thank you to the chat for hanging out. We will see you guys next time on